Now, Nigeria's headline inflation rate slowed to 21.88% in July 2025, marking a modest retreat from the previous month's figure of 22.15%, according to the latest data released by the NBS. Now, the ease in inflation reflects a marginal slowdown in price increases across key sectors, particularly in food and non-alcoholic beverages, which remain the largest contributors to the consumer price index. Head of Research at Sterling Asset Management and Trustees, Dr. Patrick Ejumedia, joins me now to discuss this further. Good morning to you, Patrick. Many thanks for joining us on the Global Business Report.
Good morning.
Most welcome.
It's good to be here again.
Yes, always a pleasure to have you. Let's begin with, what we already know. Nigeria recorded its fourth straight month of disinflation in July 2025. Yeah. What are the main drivers behind this?
Yeah, first, I think, like you said, it's important to know that consistency is key. For 4 months, we've been having inflation numbers coming down. So again, if you look at it straight away, to look at factors that are driving it, you see the lag effect of the elevated monetary policy rate that has been high, which has in a way helped to control or stabilize exchange rate and help to stabilize core inflation. So with that, you see core inflation dropping significantly. You also see energy prices that has also dropped. Then the big one, the elephant in the basket, the base year effect. Last year by this time we were around 33.4, and now because of that, we can never see price going as high as it was last year when we were seeing the impact of the removal of subsidy, fuel subsidy, and the deregulation of the exchange rate. So these are the factors, key factors that are driving inflation down.
Right, certainly. I mean, we certainly also see headline inflation dropping 21.88%. In July, that is, from 22.2% in the space of a month. Yeah. How significant is this decline for the overall broader economy?
Yeah, so to look at the significance for the broader economy, I think what we should look at first is to look at the component of the economy, the household, the investors, and the government segment. The drop in inflation has significant impact for household because, again, to increase their purchasing power and they can spend, and economy will boom. It has impact on investment as well, because as investment reduces, as inflation reduces, it has impact on cost of input. And that can increase because cost of input will begin to go down, even though it's not as significant or as low as we expect, but at least it will be going down, and that can increase production.
Could you please expatiate on that particular point of the cost of input a bit more?
Because inflation numbers is coming down.
Yeah.
When inflation is coming down, you see cost of input. Yes, inflation is high, but the rate at which they are increasing, those cost of input are increasing, will be decreasing. So you can then increase what they are buying, and they can increase production. Again, for government, it does. So government also involved in infrastructure projects and all that. So again, that will also have a way of boosting, the economy. Overall, it should have a positive impact on the economy.
Right. So we have to look at that relationally towards core inflation, which fell sharply month on month, 2.97%. What does this suggest about underlying price pressures?
Yeah, basically, because core inflation has dropped, and it dropped significantly, it signifies that basically price pressures are coming down. The pressure on prices are easing. That's what it means. If you drop that significant, and because of the impact of what the CBN has been able to do, stop speculation in the exchange rate, and that has been able to reduce the exchange rate pass-through effect on inflation. Because all of those things, exchange rates, oil prices, are some of the things that pass through, that causes prices to go up. So if core inflation has come down, what it signifies basically is that price pressures are easing off.
Right. Now, interestingly, we see food inflation there ticking up year on year due to flooding, is what we know, and insecurity.
Yes.
How worrying are these risks for food supply?
Yeah, it's worrying. It's worrying because, again, if you look at the GDP data that the government released, we saw that agricultural growth grew by 0.07%. And if you look at that vis-a-vis our population, which is around 2% or thereabouts, you see that the gap is there. So it's worrying. But again, the intervention of government in the food production chain is also helping to cool the effect. Otherwise, we would have seen that food inflation number that would have gone higher than what we are seeing or what we saw, in the just released data.
Oh, so it could have been a lot worse.
Yes, a lot worse. Yeah. If not for government intervention in terms of ensuring that food is being supplied to the market. Because if you look, like I said, output of food, agricultural output, vis-a-vis the population growth of Nigeria, vis-a-vis how the agricultural sector is growing, which is 0.07% from the last base data, GDP data that came out.
But stability-wise, what expectations could we possibly have when it comes to food supply? Given what you've just said.
So basically, you should grow your food because it's only when you have been able to feed domestically that you can then begin to talk about exporting.
Certainly.
So if you cannot produce sufficient food to feed your your population domestically, then you can't be talking about. So first is to looking at producing enough food to meet up with the population domestically. So I think the number has to go up, in terms of the growth on agricultural output. So that
for us to see stability on a more sustainable level. Now, this report notes that Nigeria ranked 9th in Africa for the largest inflation drops in July. What does this mean in a regional context?
Yeah, so I think first is to say that anytime when we produce this report, because we produce our report, immediately the CBN releases, the MBS releases the CBN data, so the inflation data. So what we try to do is to look at the time the data comes out, how many African countries have released their own inflation numbers, so we can then see the position that Nigeria is. So as at the time we did that of June, Nigeria was between 10 and 15 position. So when we now did the one for August, the one for July, we saw that Nigeria came up from that between 10 to 15 position to 9 position. So that's some form of improvement. And again, investors look at that when they are coming into a country for investment. So they see how inflation is declining to decide or to determine which of the countries that they can go for investment. And that's the essence why we put those reports in our analysis.
All right. Now, what role does the Naira stability play in all of this in terms of influencing both headline and core inflation trends?
It's key because most of them are interwoven. Most of these, like call them metrics or variables, they are interwoven. So when there's Naira stability, it has a way of cooling off core inflation, like we've seen, like we started this discussion with. So, but if it's not stable again, it can again bring about high inflation. So Naira stability is key. And that's why the CBN is doing all it can to ensure that FX is stable so that we can continue to have inflation that is going downwards.
All right, it's all leaning in the positive direction, so that's always a good thing. But let's look at state-level data now, and I have to be very careful that we have the right figures here. We have Borno recording the highest year-on-year inflation, that's 34.5%, and we have Yobe, which is the steepest decline at 11.4%. What explains such disparities?
Basically, we just said it at the beginning of this discussion, the flooding and insecurity. So states where we have high flooding and high insecurity issues, which definitely have inflation numbers going up, and states where they are relatively low, we have inflation numbers coming down. So I think these two factors are one of the...
And it's been quite rife in these particular areas for quite a while. So, of course, it will now have to come back to what you said earlier, what measures have been taken to put in place to alleviate this. Month-on-month inflation rose in 21 states, as we know, but it declined in 16 of them. How should policymakers interpret the wider mixed picture?
Okay, so basically, for the fact that it rose in 21 states, out of 36, it means that inflation is still high. So what that means is that inflation is high, and the impact varies across the states. Yeah. So that's basically, so what they should be looking at is to look at now that, yes, we have been achieving some progress, but the progress is not yet significant enough. But the progress will be very significant. We must have more states that have low inflation. So as it is now, we still have inflation going high in about 21 states. So that means, yes, we've made some progress, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Okay. Let's look at sectoral performance now, as of course this appears linked to easing inflation. Industrial goods and banking stocks gaining quite strongly there. How sustainable is this trend?
And so again, what we do every time the MBS release the inflation numbers is to again look at what happened to some of these indices that are also released by the NGS. On the NGS, we have the consumer goods index, industrial goods index, oil and gas, insurance, and the other one, about 5 of them. So what we do is to look at, the data came out for that of August. We then see how the NGS performed vis-a-vis the previous month. So of course, the data might be small, but again, it gives some pointer to how these indices has performed. So if you look at what happened when we did that for that of July, we saw that the industrial sector did well. And we saw the reason is because, again, like we have said, what that does is as inflation comes down, it increases purchasing power, increases cost of inputs, and that cost of inputs, it kind of increase production, and you see that. And that's why you saw the industrial sector having that highest growth, about 34%, in terms of the index growth for July.
Right now. So when it comes to monetary policy, and particularly, interest rates, what implications might this have? I'm talking about easing inflation in relation to that. You've already pointed out a few.
Yeah, so that's it. It has a strong relationship, even though there's an argument about the coordination of the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, working together to ensure that, we get it right. But of course, there's some level of positive relationship between, the monetary policy and being able to control the inflation rate.
So essentially, we know what to do. We just have to move the dots in the right direction. Dr. Patrick Ejumedia, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the Global Business Report this morning. We'll see you again very soon.